They mocked the woman in the wheelchair at the gun store, until she showed her uniform with 60 medals. Patricia Henderson took a deep breath before pushing the glass door of the Tactical Equipment Chicago store. The wheels of her chair turned smoothly over the ceramic floor as she entered the establishment. The smell of leather and metal filled the air, mixed with the chemical odor of cleaning products for firearms. The problem had started 2 weeks ago, when her grandson Brandon turned 15 and expressed his dream of pursuing a military career. The boy constantly talked about tactical equipment, uniforms, and survival techniques. Patricia knew exactly what she wanted to buy for him, but finding the specific item was proving more difficult than any mission she had ever faced. 2 salesmen were talking near the counter, one a tall brunette about 30 years old and the other younger, with the appearance of being newly hired. They noticed her entrance but continued their conversation as if she were invisible. Patricia moved toward a shelf filled with tactical backpacks, her experienced eyes analyzing every detail of the equipment. "Excuse me," she said, approaching the salesman. "I'd like to see some options for backpacks for outdoor activities." The brunette salesman, who wore a black t-shirt with the store's logo, looked at her with a forced smile. His expression showed more tolerance than genuine interest. "Look, ma'am, we have some basic backpacks over there in the back," he replied, vaguely pointing to a distant section. "Maybe it's better for you to take a look there. This area is more for people who know about this stuff." The comment hit Patricia like a whip, but she maintained her composure. Her fingers involuntarily tightened on the chair's armrests, a reaction she had developed over the years to control irritation. "I know about this stuff," she replied calmly. "I need a backpack with specific compartments for navigation equipment, with a MOLLE system and weather resistance. Do you have any models from the professional line?" The 2 salesmen exchanged glances, with poorly disguised expressions of surprise. The younger one, a blonde guy with a shy appearance, seemed embarrassed by the situation, but the brunette salesman maintained his arrogant posture. "Listen here," he said, approaching Patricia's chair with a condescending tone. "This equipment is expensive and specific for professional use. It's not like buying a regular bag at the mall. Maybe it's better for you to look at a department store." Patricia felt the blood rush to her face. During her military career, she had faced countless situations of discrimination, but she had never completely gotten used to the feeling of being underestimated. Her voice remained firm when she replied, "Young man, I know exactly what I'm looking for. I served in the Army for 22 years and know tactical equipment better than you probably do." The salesman let out a short laugh and looked at his colleague as if sharing a private joke. Other customers in the store began to pay attention to the conversation, some stopping their examination of products to observe the situation. All right, he said, shaking his head with an ironic smile. "Look, I'll be honest with you, ma'am. This equipment here isn't a toy. It's for people who will actually use it in extreme situations. Maybe you want something more suitable for your needs." The word suitable carried a tone that made clear what he was referring to. Patricia felt her hands tremble slightly, not from fear, but from a controlled anger she knew well. It was the same feeling she had experienced in combat, when adrenaline mixed with determination. "My needs," she repeated slowly, "include knowing the difference between a hydration system compatible with communication equipment and a simple water reservoir. They include understanding the specifications of ripstop fabrics and the importance of DWR treatment on field gear. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing." The silence that followed was tense. The dark-haired salesman opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. His younger colleague stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Excuse me, ma'am," said the young salesman. "I can show you some models. We have a specific section for professional equipment." "Tyler!" the dark-haired salesman scolded him sharply. "Return to your department. I'm handling this here." Tyler hesitated for a moment, looking between Patricia and his colleague. The expression on his face clearly showed he wanted to help, but also feared the consequences of disobeying his superior. At that moment, a middle-aged man, apparently the store manager, emerged from a back room. He was bald, with a well-groomed beard and wore a blue polo shirt with the company emblem. His eyes immediately went to the small group around Patricia. "What's the problem here?" he asked, approaching with an authoritative expression. "No problem, Mr. Derrick," replied the dark-haired salesman. "I'm just explaining to the customer that perhaps she'd feel more comfortable in another type of establishment." Derrick looked at Patricia with an expression that mixed impatience and condescension. His gaze lingered for a moment on the wheelchair before returning to her face. "Ma'am, we understand your situation," he said in a tone meant to sound understanding, but that came across completely inappropriate. "But our products are specific for activities that require full mobility. We don't want you spending money on something you won't be able to use." The words hit Patricia like a punch to the stomach. During all these years since the incident that left her paraplegic, she had faced 1,000 different forms of prejudice, but rarely so directly and cruelly. "I'm not buying for myself," she replied, her voice beginning to tremble with indignation. "It's a gift for my grandson, who's 15 and dreams of pursuing a military career. But even if it were for me, you have no right to assume what I can or cannot do." Other customers were now openly stopping to observe the discussion. A middle-aged couple near the air rifles whispered to each other, while a young man examining tactical vests completely stopped his activity to listen. "Look, ma'am," said Derrick, slightly lowering his voice but maintaining the condescending tone, "it's not a matter of prejudice, it's a matter of reality. This equipment is made for people who will face extreme situations, long hikes, climbs, things that, well, people with physical limitations cannot do." Patricia closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. Images of past missions flashed through her mind, moments when she had led teams through impossible terrain, saved lives in desperate situations, made decisions that meant the difference between success and failure in critical operations. "Physical limitations," she repeated slowly, opening her eyes and fixing them on Derrick. "It's interesting how you assume to know my limitations without knowing absolutely anything about my experience." "Ma'am, I don't want to be rude," continued Derrick, clearly irritated by her persistence. "But we have a business to run here. We can't waste time with complicated situations. Maybe you should look for a store that sells adapted sports equipment or something like that." The suggestion was the last straw. Patricia felt something break inside her, a barrier that had kept her emotions under control. It wasn't just anger, it was a complex mix of accumulated frustration, pain from being misunderstood, and an urgent need to make those people understand how wrong they were. "Complicated situations," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. Slowly, she opened the leather bag she was carrying on her lap. It was an old piece, with wear marks that told stories of countless missions. Her fingers moved carefully through the contents, searching for something specific. The salespeople watched with growing curiosity, not understanding what she was doing. Tyler, the youngest salesman, involuntarily stepped forward, his expression showing genuine concern. "What are you—" began Derrick, but stopped when he saw what Patricia was taking out of the bag. It was a military uniform, folded with millimeter precision. The olive-green fabric was impeccable, every crease exact, every detail in the right place. But it wasn't just the uniform that caught attention, it was the dozens of medals and decorations carefully attached to the fabric. The silence in the store became absolute. Even conversations in other sections seemed to quiet down, as if the entire atmosphere of the place had suddenly changed. Patricia held the uniform with reverence, her fingers lightly tracing some of the medals. Each one represented a story, a moment in her life when she had risked everything for the country and her comrades. "Complicated situations," she repeated, now loud and clear. "Let me tell you about truly complicated situations." Derrick had visibly paled. His eyes moved quickly over the medals, trying to identify some he recognized. Tyler was open-mouthed, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. "This one," said Patricia, pointing to a gold medal with a star in the center, "is the Medal for Combat Bravery. I received it after leading a rescue team in hostile territory, during an operation where our base was under attack and civilians were trapped in a burning building." She paused, letting the information sink in with the listeners. Other customers discreetly approached, forming a semicircle around her. The store's atmosphere had completely transformed. "This other one," she continued, pointing to a silver medal with red and blue ribbons, "is the Operational Merit Medal. I earned it after developing a new infiltration technique that saved the lives of 12 hostages in a situation that seemed impossible to resolve." Derek opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His posture had completely changed, his shoulders hunched in an expression of growing embarrassment. "And this," said Patricia, her voice gaining strength and emotion, "is the Personal Sacrifice Medal. I received it after losing the use of my legs during a rescue mission when a building collapsed while I was helping evacuate families. I was buried for 6 hours, but managed to keep 3 children alive until the rescue team arrived." Tears began to form in the eyes of some of those present. Tyler had brought his hand to his chest, clearly moved by the account. An elderly lady watching the scene began to cry discreetly. 22 years, continued Patricia, her voice now choked with emotion. 22 years serving our country, participating in over 100 operations, training hundreds of young soldiers like you, leading missions under conditions you can't even imagine. She paused, looking directly at Derek. "And you think I can't tell a quality tactical backpack from a cheap imitation? Do you think I don't understand equipment because I use a wheelchair?" The manager was visibly upset. His hands trembled as he tried to find words that could soften the catastrophic situation he had created. "Ma'am, we didn't know," he stammered. "You didn't know," interrupted Patricia. "Exactly. You knew nothing about me, but assumed you understood my capabilities based solely on the fact that I use a wheelchair. You assumed I was ignorant, incapable, and inconvenienced to your business." A man about 50 years old, who had approached during the exchange, stepped forward. He wore a T-shirt indicating he was also a military veteran. "Sergeant Major Patricia Henderson," he said reverently. "I know you by reputation. Ma'am, it's an honor to be in your presence." Patricia looked at him in surprise. "Did you serve?" "Retired Captain Richard Mitchell," he replied, giving a respectful salute. "I served in the same command as you during Operation Green Forest. I've heard many stories about your missions." The revelation caused a new murmur among those present. Derek seemed on the verge of a nervous breakdown, realizing the magnitude of his blunder. Tyler approached hesitantly. "Ma'am," said the young salesman with a trembling voice, I apologize. On behalf of the entire team. You didn't deserve to go through this." Patricia looked at the young man, seeing in him a sincerity she hadn't noticed in the others. There was something in his eyes that reminded her of the young soldiers she had trained over the years. "What's your name, young man?" "Tyler Campbell, ma'am. I've only worked here for 2 months." "And you, Tyler, have you served in the armed forces?" "No, ma'am, but my father served in the Navy. He always taught me to respect our veterans." Patricia nodded approvingly. "Your father raised you well." Derek finally found his voice, though he was clearly still shaken. "Mrs. Patricia, we made a terrible mistake. There's no excuse for the treatment you received here. Please allow me to try to make this right." "Make it right?" questioned Patricia, her voice still charged with emotion. "How exactly do you intend to make right years of prejudice and discrimination that people like me face every day?" The question echoed through the quiet store. Several customers shook their heads in agreement, clearly moved by the situation. "I don't know," Derek admitted honestly, "but I want to try. Could you teach us? Help us understand how to better serve our customers, especially those who have experiences we don't understand." The proposal surprised Patricia. She had expected empty apologies or discount offers, but not a genuine request for learning. Richard, the retired captain, spoke again. "Sergeant Major, if I may, I think this would be a valuable opportunity. Many companies need to better understand how to serve the entire population, especially our veterans." Other customers murmured in agreement. The elderly lady who had cried approached timidly. "My son is also a veteran," she said softly. "He sometimes avoids certain stores because he feels uncomfortable with the treatment he receives. Perhaps if more places learned—" Patricia observed the faces around her. There was a mixture of emotions: regret, admiration, curiosity, and most of all, genuine willingness to learn and improve. "There's one condition," she said finally. "Anything," Derek responded immediately. "I don't want charity. I don't want empty apologies or symbolic gestures. If you truly want to learn, that means real changes in how you operate this establishment. It means proper training for all employees. It means creating a truly inclusive environment." "Yes, ma'am, absolutely," agreed Derek. Tyler stepped forward again. "Mrs. Patricia, I would really like to learn. I've always wanted to better understand real tactical equipment, not just what we learn in sales manuals." Patricia smiled for the first time since she had entered the store. "Do you have a genuine interest in military equipment, Tyler?" "Yes, ma'am. Actually, I'm considering enlisting in the Army next year. My father says it would be a good experience for me." "Your father is right," said Patricia. "Military service teaches discipline, respect, and, most importantly, that people are much more than they appear to be on the surface." Richard moved closer. "Sergeant Major, if I may suggest, perhaps you could consider giving lectures on this subject, not just for this store, but for other companies as well. Your experience could help many people better understand these issues." The idea intrigued Patricia. She had thought several times about ways to use her experience to educate others, but had never found the right opportunity. "It's an interesting idea," she admitted. "But first, let's resolve the situation here." She turned to Derek again. "You mentioned wanting to learn. What kind of changes are you willing to implement?" Derek thought for a moment before answering. "Mandatory training for the entire team on inclusive service, review of our service policies, and if you accept, we would like you to oversee these changes as a consultant." "A paid consultant," corrected Richard. "The Sergeant Major's knowledge and experience have real value." Of course, Derek agreed quickly. "A paid consultant." Patricia considered the proposal. It was an opportunity to create real changes, not just in this store, but potentially in others as well. And it could be the start of something bigger. "Very well," she said finally. "But let's start with something simple. Tyler, you said you want to learn about tactical equipment. How about you show me the backpack models you have, and I'll explain the real technical differences between them." Tyler's face lit up. "That would be amazing, ma'am." As Tyler rushed to get different backpack models, other customers approached, curious to learn too. Richard remained nearby, clearly interested in recalling technical knowledge from his time in service. "This one," said Patricia, examining the first backpack Tyler brought, "is a basic model, suitable for short hikes. See that the back ventilation system is minimal and the compartments aren't standardized for specific equipment." She ran her fingers over the seams and zippers, testing their durability. The material quality is acceptable, but it wouldn't withstand intensive use in extreme conditions. Tyler watched every movement with full attention. "How can you tell that just by touching?" "Experience," replied Patricia. "When you carry equipment on missions where your life depends on the quality of the material, you learn to identify subtle differences that can mean the difference between success and failure." Derek watched the interaction with mixed expressions of admiration and shame. It was evident he was beginning to understand the magnitude of his previous ignorance. "Now this one," continued Patricia, examining a more robust backpack, "is a different story. Look at the MOLLE system here on the sides. This allows for attaching additional equipment in a modular way. The hydration system is well designed, with a protected outlet and reinforced tube." She demonstrated how to evaluate each technical aspect, explaining not only what to look for, but why each detail was important in real situations. "In my time of service," she recounted, "I always personally checked the equipment of every soldier under my command. A faulty zipper could compromise an entire mission. A poorly done stitch could leave someone without essential equipment at the wrong time." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The technical demonstration continued for over an hour. Other customers joined the group, asking questions and learning about features they had never considered important. The store's atmosphere had completely transformed, from a cold commercial environment to something like an informal classroom. "Sergeant Major," said Richard during a break, "you have a natural talent for teaching. Have you ever thought of formalizing it?" "Formalizing how?" asked Patricia. "Well, there's a growing demand for tactical equipment consulting, both for civilians interested in outdoor activities and for security companies. Your practical experience is invaluable." Derek, who had remained quiet for much of the demonstration, approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Patricia," he said, "I'd like to make a formal proposal. Beyond consulting for employee training, we could establish a broader partnership. You could teach technical classes here at the store, open to the public. It would be a way to educate more people, while also valuing your knowledge." The idea was tempting, but Patricia had some concerns. "And how would that work in practice? I'm not sure I'm ready for something so public." "We could start small," suggested Tyler. "Maybe bi-weekly sessions with small groups of interested people. I'd very much like to participate myself." Richard nodded enthusiastically. "It's an excellent idea, and I know other veterans who would be interested both in learning and contributing their own experiences." A new voice joined the conversation. "Sorry to interrupt," said a middle-aged woman who had approached the group. "My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm a journalist with the Evening Chronicle. I was here buying a gift for my husband and ended up hearing part of the conversation. I'd really like to talk with you about your story, if you'd allow it." Patricia hesitated. Media exposure wasn't something that appealed to her, especially considering the personal nature of her experience. "I understand the hesitation," continued Rachel, "but stories like yours can help raise awareness about biases we often don't even realize we have, and they can inspire other veterans facing similar challenges." "What exactly would you like to write about?" Patricia asked cautiously. "An article about veterans' experiences in civilian life, especially those who acquired disabilities in service. How society can better recognize and value their ongoing contributions." Richard spoke up. "If I may offer an opinion, Sergeant Major, I think it would be important. Many people simply don't know how to act around veterans with disabilities. Education is always positive." Patricia carefully considered the proposal. On one hand, she valued her privacy and didn't want to become a symbol or object of pity. On the other, she recognized that her experience could genuinely help others. "I would have some conditions," she said finally. "Of course, whatever conditions you want," replied Rachel. "First, the focus should be on education, not sensationalism. Second, I want to review the text before publication. And third, if we're going to talk about veterans with disabilities, I want it to be a complete view, including other veterans as well." "Perfect," agreed Rachel. "In fact, it would be even better to have multiple perspectives." Richard immediately volunteered to participate, as did two other veterans who identified themselves among the customers present. As they discussed the details of the potential article, Tyler approached Patricia with a shy expression. "Mrs. Patricia," he said, lowering his voice, "may I ask a personal question?" "Go ahead." "How did you handle, well, the change? I mean, after the incident that left you, after the injury?" The question was delicate, but Patricia noticed the genuine sincerity in the young man's voice. "It wasn't easy," she admitted. "In the first few months I thought my useful life was over. I had defined my identity entirely through active service, and suddenly that was no longer possible." Tyler listened with full attention, as did others who had gathered to listen. "What changed?" he asked. "I realized that my experience and knowledge hadn't disappeared. They just needed to be applied in different ways. I started working with training new soldiers, then with developing security protocols. I discovered I could contribute in ways I had never considered before. And the prejudice. How do you handle situations like today's?" Patricia sighed. "It still hurts, to be honest, but I've learned that the best response is education. People fear what they don't understand. When they realize who you really are, fear turns into respect." Derek, who had been listening to the conversation, approached again. "Mrs. Patricia," he said, "I'd like to make another proposal. How about we turn this incident into something positive? We could organize an event here at the store, a kind of educational fair about veterans and people with disabilities. You could be the keynote speaker." The idea was ambitious, but Patricia could see the potential positive impact. "It would require a lot of planning," she said, "and we'd need to ensure it's done with respect and dignity, not as a spectacle." "Absolutely," agreed Derek. "We could work with veteran organizations, disability advocacy groups, maybe even local authorities interested in promoting inclusion." Richard was enthusiastic about the idea. "I know several organizations that would be interested in participating. We could have demonstrations of adapted equipment, talks about different types of military service, maybe even recruitment opportunities for interested young people." Tyler visibly brightened. "It would be an amazing learning opportunity, and maybe other young people like me who are considering military service could benefit too." Rachel, the journalist, was taking quick notes. "This event would make a fantastic story, a real demonstration of how to turn prejudice into education and inclusion." Patricia looked around at the group that had formed. When she had entered the store that morning, she had only expected to buy a gift for her grandson Brandon. Now she found herself at the center of a discussion about social change and education. "There's one thing I need to mention," she said. "I originally came here to buy a gift for my grandson Brandon. He's turning 15 and dreams of pursuing a military career. After everything that happened, I'd still like to find the right equipment for him." "Of course," exclaimed Tyler. "Sorry, we got so caught up in the conversation that we forgot the original purpose. What specifically are you looking for him?" "A quality tactical backpack, suitable for a young man who's starting to learn about military equipment, something that can grow with him as he develops his skills." Tyler immediately began showing suitable options, applying the knowledge he had just learned. His approach was now completely different, respectful and informed. "This one would be perfect," he said, showing a medium-sized backpack. "It has professional quality, but it's not overly complex for someone who's learning. And the price is reasonable for a gift." Patricia examined the backpack carefully, testing zippers, checking seams, and evaluating the compartment system. "Excellent choice," she approved. "Brandon will love it." While Tyler prepared the purchase, Derek approached again. "Mrs. Patricia, about the payment. I want you to accept a substantial discount, not as charity, but as recognition for what you taught us today and as an apology for the initial treatment." Patricia considered the offer. "I'll accept a moderate discount, as long as it's clear it's not out of pity, but in recognition of the educational value of the experience." "Perfectly understood," agreed Derek. While the transaction was finalized, Richard approached to exchange contact information. "Sergeant Major, I'd really like to keep you informed about activities in the local veterans community. I think you would be a valuable addition to our support and education groups." "I'd be interested," replied Patricia, "especially if there are mentoring opportunities for young veterans." Rachel also approached with her business card. "Whenever you want to schedule the interview for the article, I'll be available. And if you really organize this educational event, I'd love to cover it." Tyler finished packing the backpack and handed it to Patricia with a genuine smile. "Mrs. Patricia," he said, "thank you for teaching me so much today. And, well, if you really start teaching about tactical equipment, I'd really like to be your first official student." "It would be a pleasure, Tyler," she replied. "You have the kind of genuine curiosity that makes a good soldier." When Patricia finally left the store, carrying the gift for Brandon, she felt strangely energized. What had started as a humiliating experience had turned into something potentially transformative. That evening, during dinner with the family, she told the story to Brandon and his mother, Jennifer. "Grandma," said Brandon with shining eyes, "that's amazing. Are you really going to teach about military equipment?" "Maybe," replied Patricia. "It seems there's genuine interest from people in learning." Jennifer, who worked as a nurse and had always admired her mother's strength, smiled proudly. "Mum, I think that would be wonderful. You have so much knowledge and experience to share." "And I could help," exclaimed Brandon. "I mean, when I know more about equipment, maybe I could be your assistant or something." Patricia smiled, touched by her grandson's enthusiasm. "Let's see how things develop first." The following week, Rachel published the article about veterans with disabilities, with Patricia as the main focus. The article had a much greater impact than anyone expected. Patricia started receiving calls from other companies interested in sensitivity training, from veterans groups wanting to meet her, and even from radio stations requesting interviews. A particularly interesting call came from a security equipment company in Chicago, which wanted to hire her as a technical consultant for developing adapted products. "Mrs. Henderson," said the company director during the call, "we read about your experience and would really like to discuss a partnership. We believe there's a neglected market for tactical equipment adapted for people with different types of mobility." The proposal intrigued Patricia. It would be an opportunity to use her experience to help other veterans and people with disabilities stay active in activities they loved. Meanwhile, Derek kept his word about implementing changes in the store. All employees underwent sensitivity training, and the company developed new inclusive service policies. Tyler was promoted to tactical equipment specialist and became responsible for implementing the new protocols. The educational event was scheduled for 2 months later, and the community response was surprising. Veterans organizations, disability advocacy groups, local schools and businesses expressed interest in participating. Richard became a volunteer organizer for the event, helping coordinate the different participants. "Sergeant Major," he said during a planning meeting, "this event is growing beyond our initial expectations. I think we've touched on something important in the community." Patricia agreed, but also felt the increasing responsibility. "We need to ensure the event maintains its focus on education and respect. It can't become a spectacle or something sensational." The weeks of preparation were intense. Patricia found herself developing presentations, coordinating with other speakers, and even creating educational materials about adapted equipment. Tyler became an invaluable assistant, helping organize demonstrations and coordinate with participants. His dedication impressed everyone, and several people commented on his maturity and professionalism. "Brandon," Patricia said to her grandson one evening, "would you like to help with the event? Maybe you could assist Tyler with some of the technical demonstrations." The boy was thrilled. "Really, Grandma? I could be part of this?" "Of course. In fact, it would be good to have a young person's perspective interested in a military career. You could talk about what motivates boys your age to consider service." On the day of the event, the store was transformed. Informational booths occupied all available space, with representatives from different organizations and businesses. Veterans from different eras and conflicts were present, each bringing their own perspectives and experiences. Patricia's main presentation was scheduled for mid-afternoon. When her time to speak arrived, an audience of over 50 people had gathered. "When I walked into this store 2 months ago," she began, "I only expected to buy a gift for my grandson. I didn't expect to encounter prejudice, but I also didn't expect to discover an opportunity for education and positive change." The audience listened in respectful silence, many nodding in recognition. "Today, we're not here just to talk about tactical equipment or about disability. We're here to talk about something more fundamental, the value of every person and the importance of not judging capabilities based on appearances." She told her military story, not with vain pride, but as an example of how experiences and knowledge can come from the most unexpected sources. "Each of us has a story," she said. "Each of us has valuable contributions to make. The challenge is creating a society where those contributions are recognized and valued, regardless of the physical form they take." During the question and answer session that followed, a young woman raised her hand. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, "I work at a human resources company, and we often wonder how to better integrate employees with disabilities. What advice would you give?" "First," Patricia replied, "stop thinking about integration as if it were a special favor. People with disabilities don't want charity. They want opportunities to contribute based on their actual capabilities. Second, ask people directly what they need to succeed, instead of assuming limitations." Another person asked about adapted equipment, and Patricia took the opportunity to demonstrate some prototypes she had developed with the Chicago company. "This one," she said, showing a modified backpack, "has a special attachment system for wheelchairs, but maintains all the original tactical functionality." The idea is that people with different mobility types can use professional equipment without compromising quality. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Tyler, who was helping with the demonstrations, added technical information he had learned during the months working with Patricia. It was clear he had genuinely become specialized in the subject. Brandon also had his chance to speak, discussing his motivations for considering a military career and how his grandmother's example had influenced his perspective. Before understanding my grandma's story, he said with surprising maturity for a 15-year-old boy, I thought military heroes were always big, strong people who did spectacular things. Now I understand that true courage is about character, determination, and willingness to serve others, regardless of personal circumstances. The event was a success beyond any expectation. Journalists from various outlets covered the occasion, and several companies expressed interest in implementing similar programs. In the months that followed, Patricia's life changed significantly. She became a regular consultant for several companies, developed a series of workshops on inclusion and adapted equipment, and even began working with universities on developing curricula about diversity and inclusion. Tyler was accepted into the military academy and credits Patricia as a fundamental influence in his preparation and motivation. Before leaving for training, he visited her one last time. Mrs. Patricia, he said, I want you to know that you completely changed my perspective on serving the country and on the value of every person. I promise to carry these teachings with me wherever my career takes me. I'm sure you'll be an excellent soldier, and more importantly, an excellent leader, Patricia replied. Always remember that real leadership is about serving others, not about exerting power over them. Richard continued to work with Patricia on various projects related to veterans. Together, they established a mentoring program that connected experienced veterans with young people interested in military careers. Sergeant Major, he said during one of their regular meetings, I think we've found a way to use our experiences to make a real difference in other people's lives. It's rewarding in a way I've never experienced before. Rachel, the journalist, became a frequent collaborator, helping to document and publicize the initiatives emerging from Patricia's projects. Her original article had won several social journalism awards. Patricia, she said during a follow-up interview, when I wrote that first piece, I never imagined it would result in such widespread changes. Your story truly touched something important in society. Derek, the manager of the original store, became a vocal advocate for inclusion in retail. His company implemented policies that became a model for other stores, and he often spoke at conferences about inclusive customer service. The experience with Mrs. Henderson, he said during a business presentation, taught me that unconscious biases can cost much more than just a lost customer. They make us miss opportunities for learning, growth, and real human connection. The tactical equipment company from Chicago that Patricia worked with launched a full line of adapted products that became very popular not only among people with disabilities, but among anyone who valued innovative design and superior functionality. What we discovered, said the company director in an interview, is that when you design for specific needs with creativity and respect, you often create products that benefit everyone. The universal design principles that Mrs. Henderson taught us improved our entire product line. Brandon graduated high school with honors and decided to take a year of intensive preparation before enlisting. He spent that year working as Patricia's assistant, learning not just about military equipment and techniques, but about leadership, responsibility, and service. Grandma, he said on the eve of reporting for military service, thank you for teaching me that serving the country isn't about personal glory, but about protecting and serving other people. I promise to honor that lesson. Jennifer, Patricia's daughter and Brandon's mother, watched the transformations with growing admiration. Mom, she said during a family dinner, I always knew you were strong and brave. But seeing you turn a painful experience into something so positive for so many people, that's inspiring in a way I can't properly express. 2 years after the original incident at the store, Patricia received an unexpected invitation. The Department of Defense wanted to honor her for her continued contributions to the country, specifically for her work in promoting inclusion and support for veterans. The ceremony would be held in Washington, D.C., with high-ranking military officials and government representatives in attendance. "It's an incredible honor," said Richard when he heard the news. "But it's also well-deserved recognition. The work you've been doing has national impact." Patricia felt touched, but also a bit uncomfortable with the official attention. "I didn't do any of this seeking recognition," she said. "I did it because it seemed like the right thing to do." "Exactly why the recognition is appropriate," Jennifer replied. "People need to see that positive contributions are valued and acknowledged." The ceremony in Washington, D.C. was moving. Patricia was introduced by a general who had served during the same era as her and knew about her original military contributions. "Sergeant Major Patricia Henderson," he told the audience, "exemplifies the best of the American military tradition: courage in combat, dedication to service, and, perhaps most importantly, continued commitment to the well-being of her fellow citizens even after leaving active duty." During her acceptance speech, Patricia focused not on her own achievements, but on the importance of recognizing potential in all people. "This honor," she said, "belongs not just to me, but to all veterans who continue to serve their communities in big and small ways. It belongs to all those who refuse to let physical limitations define their contributions. And it belongs especially to young people like my grandson, Brandon, who choose to dedicate their lives to the service of others." In the audience, Brandon, now a private first class, was visibly moved. Tyler, who had graduated from the military academy and was serving as a young officer, was also present. After the ceremony, a reception allowed Patricia to speak with many people who had been influenced by her work. Veterans from across the country came up to share how her initiatives had impacted their own communities. A retired colonel approached her with an interesting proposal. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, "we're developing a new training program for young officers focused on inclusive and adaptive leadership. We would very much like you to consider becoming the program's lead instructor." The proposal was tempting. It would be an opportunity to influence a new generation of military leaders, teaching them early on about the importance of valuing all kinds of contributions. "Would it be a permanent program?" she asked. "Yes, based here in Washington, D.C., but with modules at different bases across the country. The goal is to ensure all new officers receive solid training in inclusive leadership before assuming command positions." Patricia considered the offer carefully. On one hand, it represented an incredible opportunity to create systematic change. On the other, it would mean moving from Chicago and leaving behind the initiatives she had developed locally. "May I have some time to consider?" she asked. "Of course. It's an important decision, but I hope you'll consider it seriously. Your impact could be transformative." During the flight back to Chicago, Patricia reflected on all the changes that had occurred since that day at the tactical equipment store. An experience that had begun with humiliation and discrimination had transformed into an entirely new career and opportunities for impact she never imagined possible. When she arrived home, she found a letter waiting for her. It was from a young soldier who had participated in one of Patricia's workshops. "Mrs. Henderson," the letter said, "I wanted you to know that your teachings completely changed my approach to leadership. As a young officer commanding soldiers from different backgrounds, your lessons about recognizing and valuing unique contributions have been invaluable. Thank you for teaching me that true military strength comes from well-led diversity." Letters like this had become common, arriving from active military personnel, veterans, business people, and even students who had been exposed to Patricia's work in some way. That evening during dinner, she discussed the Washington, D.C. proposal with Jennifer and Brandon, who was on leave. "Mom," said Jennifer, "I think you should accept. The impact you could have at a national level would be incredible." Brandon agreed. "Grandma, imagine how many future officers you could influence, and they in turn would influence thousands of soldiers throughout their careers." "But what about the projects here in Chicago?" asked Patricia. "There's still so much work to be done." "The projects here already have a life of their own," observed Jennifer. "Richard and Tyler and all the others you trained can continue the work, and you can always maintain advisory involvement." Richard, when consulted, was even more direct in his advice. "Sergeant Major," he said, "this is the opportunity of a lifetime. You could literally shape the future of the United States Armed Forces. The local projects are important, but this is transformational." Patricia knew they were right. The opportunity to influence the formation of military leaders from the beginning of their careers was something that could have generational impact. 2 weeks later, she called the colonel in Washington, D.C. "I accept the position," she said. "When can I start?" "How about next Monday?" he replied enthusiastically. "We're looking forward to working with you." The move to Washington, D.C. was surprisingly smooth. Patricia found a suitable apartment near the base where she would work and quickly settled into the new routine. The training program she developed was innovative. Instead of traditional lectures about regulations and protocols, she created experiential exercises where training officers faced situations that tested their ability to recognize and utilize diverse talents. "Real leadership," she told each new class, "isn't about commanding people identical to you. It's about uniting different people around common objectives, recognizing that diversity of perspectives and abilities strengthens any team." The exercises she developed were challenging and revealing. Training officers found themselves leading teams that included people with different types of physical abilities, diverse cultural backgrounds, and varied communication styles. "What did you learn today?" she would ask at the end of each exercise. The answers evolved quickly. Initially, the officers focused on overcoming differences. Gradually, they began to see differences as strategic advantages. "I learned that when I stopped trying to make everyone work the same way and started understanding how each person contributes best, the team became much more effective," said one lieutenant after a particularly challenging exercise. "I realized that my assumptions about limitations were preventing me from seeing real capabilities," commented another. The program's results were remarkable. Officers who underwent Patricia's training consistently demonstrated greater leadership effectiveness, improved troop morale, and fewer disciplinary problems related to discrimination. After the first year of the program, Patricia received formal feedback on her impact. The numbers were impressive. Discrimination incidents had decreased by 40% in units commanded by officers she trained. Operational efficiency had increased by 25%, and perhaps most importantly, soldier satisfaction and retention had improved significantly. "Mrs. Henderson," said the commanding general during an evaluation meeting, "the results of your program exceed our most optimistic expectations. We would like to expand the program to include officers already in service, not just those in initial training." The proposal was ambitious, but Patricia was ready for the challenge. "We would need a larger team," she said, "and adaptation of the curriculum for officers with existing experience." "You would have carte blanche to assemble the team you need," assured the general. Patricia immediately thought of Richard, Tyler, and several other collaborators from Chicago. It would be an opportunity to reunite the team that had developed organically and apply their collective experience on a national scale. Richard enthusiastically accepted the invitation to join the program in Washington, D.C. "Sergeant Major," he said, "we worked well together in Chicago. The opportunity to expand that impact nationally is irresistible." Tyler, now a young captain with operational experience, also expressed interest. "Mrs. Patricia," he said during a call, "everything I learned about inclusive leadership came from your teachings. It would be an honor to help train other officers in these principles." The expanded team developed an even more sophisticated curriculum, incorporating real case studies, complex simulations, and even partnerships with civilian organizations for cross-sector collaboration exercises. "What we are creating," Patricia explained to the new team during the first planning meeting, "is not just military training. It is a new leadership philosophy that recognizes that real strength comes from unity in diversity." The expanded program was launched 6 months later and quickly gained international recognition. Military personnel from other countries began visiting to learn about the American methods of inclusive leadership training. During an international conference on military modernization, Patricia was invited to present the program's results. "What we discovered," she told an audience of officers from 20 different countries, "is that when you train leaders to recognize and value all contributions, You not only improve morale and efficiency, but also strengthen real operational capability. Soldiers who feel valued and understood fight more effectively and work more collaboratively. The audience's questions were insightful and demonstrated genuine interest in implementing similar programs. An American colonel asked, "How did you measure the real impact on combat capability, not just administrative metrics?" "Excellent question," replied Patricia. "We conducted field exercises comparing units led by officers trained in our program with those under traditional leadership. The units with inclusive leadership consistently demonstrated better adaptability to unforeseen situations, more effective communication under pressure, and greater tactical innovation on the ground." A German general asked another important question. "How do you ensure these principles are maintained when officers assume command in real stress situations?" "Through repeated practice in simulated stress situations," explained Richard, who had joined the presentation. "We don't just teach theory. We create situations where officers must apply inclusive principles under extreme pressure until they become instinctive." The international interest led to invitations for exchange programs and consulting. Patricia found herself occasionally traveling to other countries, helping adapt American methods to different military cultures. During a visit to Canada to consult on their veteran integration program, she received an unexpected call from home. "Grandma," said Brandon's excited voice over the phone, "I have amazing news." "What happened?" she asked, smiling at his enthusiasm. "I was selected for officer school, and the first thing the commander mentioned was that I would be trained in the program you developed." Patricia felt a wave of emotion and pride. Her own grandson would be trained using the methods she had developed. "That's wonderful, Brandon. I'm sure you'll be an excellent officer." "And there's more," he continued. "Tyler is going to be one of my instructors. He said he's excited to train the grandson of the person who trained him." The symmetry of the situation was touching. Tyler, who had started as a young and inexperienced salesman, would now be responsible for training the next generation of officers, including the grandson of the woman who had transformed his understanding of leadership and respect. When Patricia returned to the United States, she found more news waiting. The program had been so successful that the government decided to implement similar principles in other public institutions. "Mrs. Henderson," said the minister during a meeting in Washington, D.C., "we would like you to consider adapting your methods for training public managers, police officers, and even educators. The potential impact would be transformational." The proposal was tempting, but also overwhelming. Patricia realized she was reaching the limit of her ability to personally oversee all these programs. It would require a different approach, she said, perhaps a training institute that could train multipliers to implement the programs in different sectors. "Exactly what we had in mind," confirmed the minister, "and we would like you to lead this institute." The idea of creating a permanent institute dedicated to the principles of inclusive leadership was the culmination of everything Patricia had worked to develop. It would be a way to institutionalize and perpetuate the methods beyond her own direct involvement. She spent several weeks considering the proposal, consulting Richard, Jennifer, Brandon, and other close collaborators. "Mom," said Jennifer during a visit to Washington, D.C., "it seems like every opportunity that comes up is bigger than the last. Can you handle more responsibilities?" "It's not about whether I can handle it or not," replied Patricia. "It's about creating something that can continue functioning regardless of any specific person. A well-structured institute could train people to implement these principles far beyond what I could do personally." Richard completely agreed. "Sergeant Major, this is the opportunity to create a lasting legacy, something that will impact future generations." The final decision came during a conversation with Brandon, who was now progressing excellently in officer school. "Grandma," he said during a visit, "remember when you went into that store and were treated poorly just because you were in a wheelchair?" "How could I forget?" "Well, today, because of the work you've done since then, thousands of people have been trained to look beyond appearances. Imagine how many more could be impacted if you created a permanent institute." Her grandson's perspective was decisive. Patricia accepted the proposal to lead the National Institute for Inclusive Leadership. The institute was established on a specially built campus on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. The facilities included adapted classrooms, areas for practical exercises, simulation labs, and even spaces for research in group dynamics and organizational psychology. Patricia assembled a founding team that included Richard as operations director, several of the officers she had trained as lead instructors, and experts in education, psychology, and organizational dynamics. Tyler, who had been promoted to major, took responsibility for the Institute's military program, while other specialists developed adaptations for civilian sectors. The Institute's first year exceeded all expectations. Programs were developed and implemented for military officers of all ranks, federal, state, and municipal public managers, commanders and officers of the military and civil police, educational directors and coordinators, executives from companies interested in inclusive leadership, non-governmental organizations focused on social inclusion. Each program maintained the fundamental principles developed by Patricia, but adapted to the specific needs of each sector. "What impresses me most," she said during the Institute's first annual evaluation, "is how the same basic principles of respect and recognition of individual potential apply in such different contexts." The measurable results were consistently positive. Organizations that sent personnel for training at the Institute reported improvements in productivity, employee satisfaction, reduction in internal conflicts, and greater ability to adapt to changes. During the second year, the Institute began receiving regular international visitors. Delegations from other countries came to study the American methods and adapt them to their own organizational cultures. "Mrs. Henderson," said an ambassador during an official visit, "the work you've developed here is influencing discussions about organizational modernization in several countries. It's truly impressive." International recognition led to invitations for Patricia to speak at prestigious universities, global leadership conferences, and even meetings of heads of state interested in government modernization. During a lecture at Harvard University, a student asked, "Professor Henderson, how did you go from an isolated incident of discrimination to creating such broad systemic changes?" "Your question makes me reflect on something important," she replied. "It wasn't the incident itself that created these changes. It was the decision to turn a negative experience into an educational opportunity. And, more importantly, it was realizing that real change requires systems, not just good intentions." During the Institute's third year, Patricia faced a difficult decision. She had received a medical diagnosis that, while not serious, indicated she should reduce her work pace. "Doctor," she said during a consultation, "how long can I maintain my current level of activities?" "Mrs. Henderson," the doctor replied, "you have been working tirelessly for years. Your body is asking for rest. It's nothing life-threatening, but ignoring the signs now could lead to more serious problems in the future." The news forced Patricia to consider her future and the future of the institute she had created. During a meeting with her core team, she shared the situation. "What does this mean for the institute?" asked Richard, visibly concerned. "It means the time has come to ensure everything we've built can continue, regardless of my direct involvement," replied Patricia. "In fact, I always knew this day would come. A truly successful institute shouldn't depend on a single person." The transition was carefully planned. Richard took on the role of executive director, with Tyler as director of military programs and other specialists, taking responsibility for different sectors. Patricia maintained an advisory role, but significantly reduced her daily activities. "Actually," she said to Jennifer during a visit, "I'm discovering that being less involved operationally allows me to see the bigger picture better, and I'm proud of how the team is stepping up." The Institute's fourth year marked an important turning point. For the first time, more than half of the programs were conducted by instructors who had been trained by the Institute's team, not by Patricia directly. "This is exactly what we wanted," said Richard during an evaluation meeting. "We're seeing real multiplication. People who were trained here are now training others in their own organizations." Brandon graduated from officer school with honors and was assigned to a position where he could immediately apply the inclusive leadership principles he had learned. During his graduation ceremony, he was selected to speak on behalf of his class. "What we've learned here," he told the audience, "is that real leadership isn't about exercising authority, but about recognizing and developing potential in others. Some of us were fortunate to learn this from instructors who were trained by my grandmother, a woman who turned personal prejudice into institutional progress." Patricia, present at the ceremony, felt deep satisfaction seeing her grandson articulate principles that had become central to a new generation of military leaders. In the following months, she began working on a book documenting not just the methods developed by the Institute, but also the personal stories and experiences that had informed its development. "I don't want it to be just a technical manual," she explained to the publisher. "I want it to include the human stories that show why these principles matter in real life." The book included stories of Tyler, from inexperienced salesman to major specializing in inclusive leadership; Richard, from isolated veteran to director of a national institute; Brandon, from admiring teenager to officer, applying inclusive leadership principles; hundreds of others whose lives had been touched by the programs. But the most powerful chapter was about Derek, the former store manager of the tactical equipment shop. After his store's transformation into a model of inclusive service, Derek had been invited to consult for other companies. Eventually, he left retail to dedicate himself fully to business training in inclusion. "Mrs. Henderson," he said during an interview for the book, "that day in my store was the worst and best day of my professional career. Worst because I discovered how my prejudices were hurting people. Best because I learned that it's always possible to change and improve." His company now trained thousands of retail employees per year, and he often told the story of his encounter with Patricia as an example of personal transformation. "What impresses me most," he continued, "is that you could have simply sued me or ruined my reputation. Instead, you chose to educate me. That choice changed not only my life, but the lives of thousands of people impacted by the work I do now." The book was published in the Institute's 5th year and became an unexpected bestseller. More important than sales, it became a study text in leadership, management, and inclusion courses at universities across the country. During the book launch, an event was organized at the original equipment store where everything had begun. The store now proudly displayed certifications like Model of Inclusive Service and had become a reference point for other companies. Tyler, now a lieutenant colonel, attended the launch in full military uniform. "Mrs. Patricia," he said during the event, "5 years ago I was just a young salesman who knew very little about anything important. Today, I command a unit of 200 soldiers and use the principles I learned from you daily. More importantly, I'm passing these principles to the next generation of leaders." Richard also spoke during the event. "When I met Sergeant Major Patricia, I was a retired veteran who felt disconnected and without purpose," he said. "Through the work we developed together, I found a new mission that is as meaningful as anything I did during my active service." Brandon, now a first lieutenant with operational experience, represented the new generation trained under the principles developed at the Institute. "What my grandmother taught me," he said, "is that true military strength doesn't come from forced uniformity, but from well-led diversity. In my unit, we have soldiers from very different backgrounds, and our strength comes from knowing how to use these differences as tactical advantages." Jennifer spoke as the family representative. "My mother has always been an example of courage and determination," she said, "but seeing her transform a painful personal experience into something that benefits thousands of people, that goes beyond courage, it's wisdom in action." Rachel, the journalist who had written the first article, was also present. "5 years ago, I thought I was writing an interesting story about prejudice and overcoming," she said. "I didn't imagine I was documenting the beginning of a movement that would transform how American institutions think about leadership." The highlight of the event was when Patricia was invited to speak. "When I walked into this store 5 years ago," she began, looking around the transformed space, "I was just trying to buy a gift for my grandson. I had no idea I was about to embark on the most meaningful journey of my life." She paused, looking at the familiar faces in the audience. "What I've learned is that real transformation doesn't happen through grand gestures or dramatic statements. It happens through small, consistent changes in how we treat each other every day. It happens when we choose to see potential where others see limitations. During the Q&A session that followed, a young woman raised her hand. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, "what advice would you give to people facing discrimination today?" Patricia considered carefully before answering. "First, remember that discrimination says more about the limitations of those who discriminate than about any real limitations of yours. Second, when possible, choose education over confrontation. And third, never underestimate the power of transforming negative experiences into opportunities to create positive change." Another person asked, "How do we maintain these principles when facing pressures to conform or when others resist inclusion?" "Persistence and example," Patricia answered. "Cultural change takes time, but when people see that inclusion works, that it makes organizations more effective and people happier, resistance gradually fades." End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're following us from. If you have something to share with us, leave your sincere words in the comments. Do you believe Patricia made the right decision by turning a painful experience into an educational opportunity? We'd love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.